All right, Jeff, I'm going to hand it off to you and turn off my camera.
All right, sounds good. Thanks everyone for being here, and I wanted to get started. Let me start sharing my screen. Actually, I think I need controls, Pam. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to start sharing my screen, just give you a little introduction to myself, and then we'll get started into the topic as well. I am not looking at the chat, but Pam is, and so every once in a while I will ask Pam if there's any questions. So feel free to type in those questions at any point as we go through here. My goal today is just to kind of show you different ways that you can start using xAPI, even if you're brand new to xAPI. If you're experienced in it, some of this may be review, but I'm going to be talking about other tools that you can use to help you get started with xAPI as well, or even how to connect different tools that you may not even thought of that could do xAPI as well. We'll talk about a tool there. So I want to start out with some of the basic tools that you may be familiar with already and how you can start doing that even without adding any type of custom triggers. And then we'll talk about a tool that you can do to even add on custom stuff. So a lot of different kind of exploration inside of this session here. So again, if you have questions, feel free to type those in. Just a background to myself real quick. I am a learning experience designer with Amazon. Create a lot of training for their same day service, which is like if you order something online and have it delivered the same day. I create a lot of training for their locations there. But I also have been doing a lot of side stuff for years. My own company, Learning Dojo. I do a lot of training. I have courses on Pluralsight. I have lots of courses on Udemy as well, covering everything from like web development to Storyline, xAPI, everything like that. Oh, sorry, I went backwards. And then also I teach as an adjunct professor. I'm located here in Utah, and I teach as an adjunct professor in their instructional design master's degree department there. So background over. But now I wanted to dive into the actual content of it. And this is really the challenge that I've seen for years. I've been working with xAPI since it first came out, back when it was called Tin Can, and been, testing out a lot of different things, been teaching about it as well. And so I think the real challenge in adoption has been mostly that xAPI itself has been code-based. And so a lot of people have embraced it, and they have done it, and they've done some amazing things with xAPI and code. But that, I think, is the challenge, because not everybody goes into code or wants to or can or can go in and have the time to really learn the code in order to really implement xAPI the way that it can be. And so that, I think it's doable, but I think that's been the biggest challenge. And so the reason why I wanted to teach this session is because I wanted to just explore things that are nowadays, like in the past year, we have seen a lot of different tools and updates and so forth that have made it a lot easier. So you don't need to know this code in order to do it. If you do know code, great, you're going to be able to do it even better. But if you don't know code, you can at least get some xAPI data from these different platforms, basically. So I'm going to walk through that. Now, there's an important concept. I'm sure that if you've been in the cohort already, you know the basic concept is the statements that you send over to the LRS consist of the actor, the verb, what the action is, and then the object, what is the description of that verb, basically. So something like Jeff Batt's downloaded, and what did he download? The help guide on ethics. And so that's really what comes into that statement. So when we're working with these different tools, even like Storyline or Captivate or Lectora or Domino or any of those tools, it's important to know at what point you're going to send this type of information. What type of action did they do? And what type of description are we going to add on to that action? Now, there really comes a couple important concepts when learning about sending over xAPI statements. And the first thing I think that is not emphasized enough is the event. The event is what happens, at what point happens. Is it a button click? Is it a page turn? Is it somebody clicked on a download button? Did they like a certain item? And so those are different types of events that could happen. When I'm starting to design out xAPI and what information that I want to get from a learning experience, that is the first thing that I look at, is what type of events are happening during this, this course. And so the next thing that is important to know is the command. This is when we're going to send over and we're going to tell the LRS, or we're going to send over the statement to the LRS. And so that's the second part. And then the last part is in the condition. Now, this event may happen and the command may want to trigger, but we may want to do it only in certain situations. Have they met that condition? This is an important concept to know just with any types of triggers in whatever application or whatever code, even in JavaScript, whatever code that you're working with, is knowing the events that are going to happen, knowing the command that you want to send over to the learning record store, and then knowing in what condition you want to send it over as well. And so inside of Storyline, and I'm just going to use Storyline. I know some of you may be using Domino, some of you may be using Lectora, some of you may be using Captivate, but I'm just going to use Storyline as an example here. When I add a trigger, those three things, the event is actually inside of here. So you have like the action, that is the command really. And so the other part inside of a Storyline trigger is the event, when it actually happens. And to me, it's kind of backwards, because typically in JavaScript, you would have the event first and then you would have the command, but Storyline kind of swaps that. And so the event in this case is when the user clicks on this rectangle 1, it's going to jump to the next slide. That's the command, is to jump to the next slide. And then you have the condition. In what condition is that going to happen, basically? So let's just apply this real quick to a scenario, and then we'll jump into these different tools and I'll talk to you about ways that you can implement it. And so thinking about the events, thinking about the command, and thinking about the condition, when I'm wanting to track a video, for example, what types of events are happening when I'm watching a video? So I have a play event when the learner clicks on play. And so that is the event itself. They click on play. And then I could, at that point, create, and the command could be create an xAPI statement, and then send over that xAPI statement to the learning record store. And so that is the command. Now, we didn't add a condition in this case. The condition would be something like only in certain situations, but we had that event, and then we're sending over the statement. So what other events could happen here? So the learner could actually pause the video, and that's another event. And so start thinking through those different things. When you're looking at your learning interaction, what types of events do I want to be able to track? I don't recommend that you go in and track everything, because are you really going to need to know everything? But strategically think about, okay, what are important events to me? What do I want to know in my organization? What's important for us to know? And so you could do the pause event, and you could create that xAPI statements and then send it over. And even with the pause event, in some tools you can get to, you can know exactly where they paused. You could even like track if they clicked on the volume, other things like that. You could even track when they reach halfway as well. So that's another event that could trigger this xAPI statements. And then also, finally, when they complete the video, you can trigger that event happens, and then you can trigger that xAPI statements and send it over to the learning record store. So even with just one little video, xAPI allows you to track all these different things and give you a lot more detail in video than what we can get with like SCORM. And I like to use that example because video production takes a lot. You have a lot of time, especially if it's a live video, a lot of time and effort to create the video. So xAPI is the answer to know how effective, or even if that video was watched, or questions afterwards, if they were able to consume the data from the video, things like that. This is where I think xAPI can really come into play. All right. So this is the statement feed that comes in from the learning record store, which if you've been part of the cohort, this should look familiar to you. And so I want to show you three different things. Now I'm going to get into the different examples here. I'm going to show you what's out of the box, and I'm going to show the example of Storyline, but it's similar with Lectora and Domino and other things. And then I'm going to show you a custom external one that doesn't take any code at all. And then I'm going to go into a tool called Zapier. And the reason why I like Zapier is because it allows me to connect tools that are not typical e-learning authoring tools. So I could actually connect and track something from like a Google Forms or Google Doc, and then it could trigger events over to Learning Record Store, and without any type of code whatsoever. So this is one of the reasons why I wanted to show you this, because it opens up a lot more tracking capability here. So let's start with out of the box here. So I have a sample course inside of Storyline here, and I'll kind of talk through the differences between other tools as well. But even out of the box, if I was to come in and add no custom triggers whatsoever, xAPI triggers, what I recommend is if your learning management system can handle either CMI5 or xAPI packages, that you start publishing to those rather than SCORM, because it gives you out of the box already a lot more data inside of your course. And so if you come into with Storyline here, if I come into the LMS section and then I select this drop-down box, I can do xAPI or I can do CMI5 packages. Now, it's basically, I know it's a bad example, somebody might argue with me, but it's basically like a new version of SCORM. So it gives you a lot more data with this SCORM package, which means you still have to upload it to an LMS in this way. It's not external. It's not reporting. I don't have it on my website. I have to upload it to my LMS. That's the difference between these xAPI packages and CMI5 packages. Now, CMI5 is the better and later standard. So if your LMS handles that, I recommend publishing straight to CMI5. So I'm going to do that for now, and I'm not going to add the report to an external learning record store. If your LMS doesn't do this, you could still connect to an external learning record store and still send over information, which we'll talk about in a bit here, but I'm going to publish that out. Now, for the sake of time, I've already actually published it. But I'm going to go into my sample learning management system, which I'm using SCORM Cloud. You can sign up for a free account. I use it for all my SCORM testing and initial xAPI testing as well, because it gives me both an LMS and LRS to be able to test with here. And I've already uploaded this Cooking 101 CMI5 course here. I'm going to go ahead and click on launch here. And this is without, again, adding any type of custom triggers or anything like that. I'm going to go ahead and hit launch. And then now I have, let me hit resume. Let me actually go back to the very beginning here. All right, so now I'm going to just go through my course like normal here. All right, so I'm going to close that out. Now, out of the box, inside of SCORM Cloud and inside of your LMS, if it supports CMI5 or xAPI, you can click on this View Registration Statement History. It might be in a different spot in your LMS, so keep that in mind. But out of the box, I'm already able to track that I experienced the course, that I left certain pages and came back to a page. So what was interesting to us is when we implemented in my organization before Amazon, but in my organization, we implemented tracking every single page on the course. And the most interesting thing about it is inside of our learning record store, we created a report of like the most frequent viewed pages. And the part that was interesting is seeing those pages that people would come back to. So you would think that page 1 would actually be the most visited page, but we found that, you know, there was, I can't remember the exact number, but like page 12, that was more viewed than page 1, which means that people were coming back, and whatever content was on that page, people were coming back to that page, which is very interesting that we couldn't, you know, even be able to tell if we were just using SCORM. So that's out of the box, no code whatsoever. That's the type of information, and it would give over quiz data and everything like that. When I complete the course, all of that would be inside of my learning management system. So step number one, ask your learning management system if they can handle, excuse me, if they can handle CMI5 or xAPI packages, and if they can, try to publish to that instead of SCORM. I mean, I think it's time to let SCORM kind of fade away, in my opinion. That may be controversial, I know, but I'm going to go ahead and let's now explore adding on to that, because those are out of the box. One kind of wish I had with Storyline would be the ability to customize and not send over so many statements, because it sends over a lot. And so you don't have control over those default statements, but what you do have control over is what other statements get sent over. So I could come in here and add a trigger to Storyline if you're not already familiar with this. And I could go in and add on, let me do this real quick, but I can add on and send xAPI statement here. And then I could select this drop-down box of the different types of verbs that are inside of this list here. You're not limited to this list. You can actually use, go in and find other verbs and replace this, but you could come in here and just select one of these different verbs here. And when you select the verb, you have this drop-down box to include the, that will be the verb, but now you get to include the object. Now the object could be the page name. The object could be like a certain object on the stage that they've clicked on, or you could go to custom and just type in some custom text. And so it doesn't matter what you type in, or it doesn't matter what's already on the stage, you can type in whatever you want from there. So I'm going to type in some custom, just type in sample for now. And what would happen, or something to keep in mind, if I go back into the CMI5 package here, you don't want to duplicate the same statements that Storyline is sending over. Keep that in mind, because now you're just sending extra data. So notice that Storyline by default is sending over experienced every time somebody visits a page. And then they send over left every time somebody leaves a page. So I don't need to track page visited in this case, but I may want to track something like clicking on a page button or a tab or something like that. So just something to keep in mind there. Now, if you click on this xAPI plus xAPI option here, it does give you the actual JSON data that you get with xAPI, and you could go in and you could add on to this and you could customize this as much as you want. So I could come into this description here and I could add on additional variables from Storyline. So if I had like a game, I could include the score from the game inside of here. So just a lot of possibilities. In this part, you're kind of working with a little code, but you're not actually typing in any code. So I just wanted to point that out there. Now, I think there is a question here. So xAPI and CMI5 both do need to be uploaded into an LMS. So then send over to the LRS. That is a good question. xAPI package, when we talk about not just xAPI, but the xAPI package, it does need to be uploaded to an LMS. But when you publish this out, you could also connect to an additional, if your LMS handles xAPI or CMI5, it kind of already has like an internal learning record store inside of it. So you don't need to even do the external learning record store. But if you publish to something like SCORM, for example, SCORM 2004, notice how this option is still available, the report to an external learning record store. So if your LMS does not handle the CMI5 or xAPI packages, you can do it this way. And then if you click on this reporting, go into the learning record store, then you could connect the endpoints, the key, and the secret here as well. So hopefully that answers your question. All right. So now if I were to come in and add on those custom xAPI statements, then I could, when I get to that page or I interact with that tab or something like that, it will track even more. So I wanted to point that out first, and that was the first thing that I wanted to cover. There is some restrictions with the way that Storyline publishes out xAPI, and the restrictions is capturing the actor. Even if you're reporting over to an external learning record store, it is really hard to capture the actor, who the person is, unless you're actually passing over that information through what's called a query string. Now, they do have some documentation to kind of help you with that, but you do have to work a little bit with your single sign-on IT department, whoever you're working with, to really know how to capture who that person is. The other route that you can do is send over with custom JavaScript. You can actually go in and capture the actor from text field inside of the course. So there's a couple of challenges like that with Storyline that I wish you could just, inside of Storyline, add like a little text entry field to enter in the person's name and their email, and then use that when I'm sending over the statements to an external learning record store. So for that reason, if that's a challenge for you, that's one of the reasons why I built this tool. It's called xAPI Builder, and you can get xAPI Builder.learningdojo.ninja. It's all free. And this actually allows you to go in and do that custom JavaScript a little bit easier without you having to type it in. So the first thing you do is you add an endpoint and a key and a secret, which I'll do that real quick. I'm going to go into this learning record store. And I do have resources I can provide if I'm going too fast here. Feel free to email me, jeff@learningdojo.ninja. I can give you resources there. But I'm going to go into the activity providers here, go and paste the secrets, and then or the key and the secret here. And then I'm going to decide if this is Storyline, Captivate, or a custom HTML. So in my case, I'm going to do Storyline. And then I'm going to go to this statement generator. Now, this gives me a list of all the different verbs that are available here. So inside of my verbs, I would go in and just say, I'm just going to use the experienced verb. And then what did they experience? Well, that's going to be PDF on ethics. And then I can add a description to that as well. Now, as I hit save here, I can start adding a lot of different statements, and it will just add it to like the queue inside of the little drop-down box here. Now, the only thing I have to do, there's actually two steps. And so I have to copy and paste these inside of JavaScript triggers inside of Storyline. And then when I publish out my Storyline course, I have to download files and attach them. So it's a couple extra steps, but another benefit to it is you don't get all those extra statements that Storyline sends over. You only get the statements that you want, and you're able to also grab the user from the Storyline course rather than having to work with a query string. So I'm going to hit copy here, and I'm going to come into Storyline. And if I were to add on a trigger, in this case, I could go ahead and add on an execute JavaScript trigger. And then I just paste in that code right there. So that's the only thing you have to do. So you just go in and do that to all the different events. Remember the events, the commands. So I have to go into all the different events and trigger those different events here, and then just copy and paste over. The last step I have to do with this, and I have videos on this I could send you, but the last step is basically just downloading these 3 files and then attaching those files to the story.html file when you publish. You don't have to do this. You can use the default Storyline triggers that if you want, but if you're having trouble with capturing who the person is, this is just another way of doing it, basically. All right. The final thing that I want to spend time on is the connecting tools that are not your typical authoring tools to a learning record store. So I'm going to go into a tool called Zapier. Zapier is one of my favorite tools. It's a way for you to be able to automate different things. You can take that whole concept of events, something just happened, and then you could trigger commands based on that events. I've used it to connect different things like surveys to create Trello cards and other things like that. But you can also connect an event that happened in a tool to send over an xAPI statement to certain learning record stores. Now, there's some tools that are out of the box with Zapier that you can do, and they've already made the connections, but it is so open that even if your tool doesn't handle it, if your tool like your learning record store or something like that can handle webhooks, or it can handle API, it has like an open API or something like that, then you can still customize Zapier to do that. Now, one of the tools that handles it out of the box is Watershed. That is one of the learning record stores that's in there kind of out of the box. Another one is called Grassblade that I haven't played around with much, but that is something that I can do right inside of Zapier. So that's what I'm going to walk through this example. And what I wanted to do is I created this form, this simple tracking form. So let's say my small company, they don't really have a lot of resources, but they do want to be able to track and encourage learning that's happening outside of learning management systems. And so you could set up a form like this where somebody comes in and enters in their name, enters in their email, and then they can type in what activity they did. And then you can add on any information that you want inside of this form. So just a simple Google Docs form here. Now, in order for this connection to be made inside of Zapier, you do have to have at least one sample result here. So you at least have to have some data to be able to work with. So in this case, we have Sammy McGee. I just typed in my email there and I selected the conference response. And so I have the data in there that now I can make that connection. And I've already set up my Watershed accounts, my sample Watershed account, which you can sign up for free as well, watershedlrs.com. And then I'm going to go into Zapier here. So now that I have those two accounts kind of set up, I'm going to go in and create a new Zap. Zap is that connection, basically. So what I do, and notice, there's over 5,000 different applications that are out of the box already. So chances are, a tool that you use in your company already has that connection there. So like Salesforce, or let's say MailChimp. Yeah, MailChimp right there. So any of those types of events, an email that comes in could trigger an xAPI statements. A Trello card that's created could trigger an xAPI statements. A calendar event or something like that could trigger. So to me, it's like surprising that we don't use Zapier more, because you could even connect a bunch of different events together. But I'm going to go ahead and say Google Forms here. And so there is my Google Forms right here. And then what I would do is I would choose the event. So in this case, a new form response. Somebody has created this new form. This is going to be my events, or updated form. If somebody goes in and updates a form, do I want to trigger a different event? But I'm going to click on new form here, and then I'm going to hit continue. Now, if you have not connected your Google account yet, this is where it's going to ask you to authenticate and connect your Google account. This basically is handled by APIs, which means that it's not giving your login info to Zapier at all. It's basically Zapier is saying, hey, Google, do you authenticate this? And Google says yes, without passing any type of like real data. That's what it's doing here. All right, so now I'm going to hit continue, and then I'm going to set up the trigger. So the trigger, or the form that I want to trigger this event. So in this case, my form is called track learning. I can see it right here. And so it's pulled up right there. So I can just hit track learning, and then I can hit continue. Now it's going to test that. It's going to look for some actual data that's already inside of Google Forms, which I do have that data. So this one should work just fine. And you can see there's my data that comes back. jeffbatt@gmail.com, Sammy McGee, and conference is the information that's coming back, which is important. Now, if I click on continue, now what do I want to happen with that event? With a free account of Zapier, you can have 100 different events happen for free. And so, that means 100 different people a month could go in and type in something, and it would do it for free. If it goes beyond 100 within that month, then that's where you have to pay, but the pay is like $40 or something for the next level up. So it's really, I don't think it's that hard, or sorry, that expensive. All right, so what I want to do is the event that I want to happen in this case is send over that xAPI statement. So I'm going to type in watershed, or if you just type in LRS, for example, you can see the different examples of or the grass blade LRS or the watershed LRS. But like I mentioned, if your LRS is not found here, if your LRS has open APIs or webhooks or something like that, you can still use them. It just takes a little bit more connecting to do. All right, so this is what I want to happen. So the events that happened was the filling out the form. And now this is what I want to happen once that happens here, which is send a statement. So we're going to send the statements, but the nice thing about this is it'll have me build out the statement, but it's not having me type in any code at all. So I'm going to go ahead and choose I've already connected my Watershed LRS account. So we're good here. It'll just have you log in. Like I mentioned before, I'll hit continue. And then this is where I capture the actor name. So it's going to walk me through that statement information, the actor, the verb, the description, and other metadata that I may want to add here. So where am I getting that actor from? Well, that's from the Google form. It's from this right here. So I'm going to go in to the Google form and I'm going to type in, I'm going to click on show all options here. And then I'm going to look for the name right here. So it says, what is your name? That is where I'm going to capture who that person is. So that's one of the important things about having that sample data. There is being able to pull that in. And I apologize for clearing my throat. I'm still trying to get over a cold that I got last week. I feel better, but all right. So the next thing is the actor email. And this is the email right here. It has to have that with xAPI, has to have that unique identifier. And so that's my email. And then the actor name right here. This is basically how it's going to show up. This is the account name, actually, sorry. So this could be like the person's name again, or it could be like your company name. So let me just type in Learning Dojo. I could do that. And then I can do the accounts, the actor homepage if I wanted to. That part right now is kind of optional, so I'm just going to leave that blank. And then this is the verb. So the verb now allows me to select from this drop-down box what type of action did they do. And so it's going to take a second to populate. Let me see if there's something like answered. Yep, there it is, answered. And then verb display will be, we can type in answered here. And then the activity ID is required. Typically, the activity ID is your company name, or sorry, your company email. And then it could be anything afterwards. So it could be like, I always do like xAPI course 101. This is not a real URL if you're not familiar with this. This is just something that you make up as a unique identifier. All right, so the activity name, this is like, what did they do? So I could just grab in that information. So really what I'm doing here is I'm inserting the information from that Google form to build the statement. So at times I may need to type it out myself, but at other times I can pull the data from the form itself. So I can go ahead and say, well, what did they do? They answered survey. And then if I had information about, or if I had the name of the survey, I could type that in there. Sorry, it went away there. Let me type that again. So I'm going to say survey with, and then I'm going to go ahead and add on conference right there. So I entered in survey with, and then it was going to say answered survey with, and then conference. That's what it's going to say, or whatever the option that the user had selected. And I could add more descriptions here. If I wanted to, I can add on any success or completion or other things like that. But I think that's enough for now. This is all the metadata in xAPI that you can do, but you don't need to fill all that out. You can go ahead and hit continue. And then I want to test this action. So I'm going to click on test action. And it's going to send over a test xAPI statement to my learning record store, and it'll show green if everything worked. but I do want to go into my learning record store, and I'm going to go into my data search here. And there we go. Sammy McGee answered survey with conference. So I can have all that data just from that Google form. And so, and that's just, one possibility. I could do this with like when somebody does Trello and they create a Trello card, or when somebody, inside of a Google Doc adds, inserts a field or something like that. Each application that you connect inside of Zapier has different events that can trigger different things. And then you can send over the statements to your learning record store there. So I'm going to pause, and Pam, are there any questions?
There are not in the Q&A or in the chat. Anybody with a question, type it in now. You've got about 9 minutes left.
Okay. So at the end of this, I would give it a title up on top here. And so let's say, call this one Google Forms. And then I would hit publish Zap. Publish and turn on. It's going to publish for me. And now my Zap is on. So if I edit something about the Zap, it will break it, and then I'll have to republish it, which is fine. But it's just something to keep in mind. But now it's right there. Now I do have the starter plan, and so I'm able to handle 750 a month of these different events that happen. And yeah, but you can see right here, SurveyMonkey can connect to Trello and then send over a watershed. I did that for one organization where they fill out the SurveyMonkey, and then it creates a Trello card for somebody to follow up on, and then it's sent over xAPI statement to watershed. And so hopefully that gives you an idea of like really what you could start doing out of the box without having to know any type of code. And I'm going to pull up just some resources here for you to follow up on. So my blog I have a lot of different videos on at learningdojo.ninja, and then you just click on the blog. I have a lot of different videos on xAPI, customizing the storyline statements, pulling the current dates into storyline as well, adding on, custom variables like I talked about as well. So there's a lot of resources there. And then, excuse me, a lot of templates as well. I need a drink of water, but a lot of templates that you can download for video, as well as like PDF tracker for xAPI. I'm not seeing any other questions here, so that's pretty much all that I had to
Not seeing
cover
any
here.
either.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, everyone.